Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Charles Nosey Podcast. And as we have just told you in our introduction, we are excited about this incredibly special guest today. He's been a friend of mine for
Ever.
Yes, yes,
Forever.
I met him. I think I met him in high school because I was doing. My dad was having him come in and speak. But then when I was in college, I was off in Utah doing a little youth conference. And I'll never forget he was flying back in those days, you get upgraded pretty easily, and he got me upgraded on that flight. I don't know if he even remembers that or not, but we sat next to each other on that flight back from Utah all the way back to Atlanta, and he was a huge encouragement to me. And then when I graduated from college, I tell everybody I only had 4 open dates: winter, spring, summer, and fall. And I didn't know what I was going to do. All I knew was I was going to go into this little solo ministry and try to sing some places. And my friend Ike Reighard recommended me to a guy named Mike Lynch, who helped me get into a little camp called Impact. And I got to sing a few songs in front of a bunch of youth pastors. That led to a bunch of camps called Super Wow. And by the end of that first summer, I never looked back. It was 30 years ago. So Ike Reighard, I look at as one of the very, very key people in helping me start my ministry 30 years ago. And here's what I tell everybody about Ike Reighard before you guys meet him. He is the person in the world that I think has done more for more people than anybody I know. Ike Reighard's sole interest in people is helping them succeed, and he does a magnificent job of that, and I'm a personal testimony of that. So that's just a side note. He's also incredibly successful as a pastor and runs a huge ministry in Atlanta, and you're going to hear all kinds of stuff. But for now, I want everybody to meet, so we have to do a big applause here.
Yeah.
Ike Reighard. Yeah. Thanks for coming on, buddy.
Boy, I can hear that heartfelt applause all the way here in Atlanta. Man, that was staggering, guys. Thanks for that effort right there.
You're welcome.
Charles, it's great. It's great to be on with you. And I certainly remember when I met you when you were in high school. We were at First Baptist Church Orlando doing the State Youth Evangelism Conference. And then I met you in Salt Lake City, Utah, when you came in to do the music for your dad's conference there. Yep. And it was a pretty amazing night because I remember watching you do something pretty unique. There was one young lady, you did some singing, and then we took a break and they were going to come back and have me to do the speaking. And I watched you go over. We were in this huge cafeteria at this high school. And I watched this one young lady who was overweight, kind of standing over in the corner by herself. And I watched you go over to that young lady and start talking to her. And then I watched you bring her over to a table where you were going to sit down. And all of a sudden, there were all these other kids that were around that table. And probably for the first time in that young lady's life, she was at the right table at the right moment. And I remember watching that and thinking, I would do anything in the world to help this guy succeed in life. And, success is about doing something for yourself, but significance is about doing something for other people. And so I love to try to be significant in life and helping people. Man, that's just the greatest joy in the world. I mean, it truly is.
Mm. Well, he's already thrown out a couple of little wise singers. You're going to hear a lot of those folks. So just get ready. Minute. Yeah, just get ready. This is one of my favorite people on the planet because you're blessed with so much wisdom. But you read. Let's just talk about that just for a second before we get into your story. You read, I mean, at least 4 books a month. But I mean, it seems like every time I've ever been with you, you were in the middle of about 4 different books.
Absolutely. That's because I've never had an original thought in my life. And so I have to borrow from other people. Some people call it, R&D, research and development. For me, it's rip off and duplicate just as fast as you can, because I love to learn and, real power is not in the hands of learned people. It's in the hands of learning people. And the last thing I want to be, is an 8-track tape player in a live streaming world. You know what I mean? So, learning, gaining new insights, man, that's where it's at. That's why I love to surround myself with young leaders. And, young leaders will thank me for being the old guy in the group, that supposedly has the wisdom. And I'm sitting there asking them for ideas the whole time because you want to stay relevant. And, change is going to happen, but growth is optional. And I've made, the choice in my life that I'm going to grow with all the changes that I've seen in the world that I've worked in for nearly 50 years, and that's being a pastor.
Mm. You know what? Maybe we should start where you're at now and move backwards and close with sort of your testimony. Let's go with where you're at now.
Okay.
You're pastor at Piedmont Baptist, which or just Piedmont Church, which I've been to a couple of times with you, and it's a wonderful, wonderful place. But you also lead a ministry called Must Ministries. Tell us about your journey to get into that place, and then we're going to start moving backwards and go to Home Bank and all that other stuff that you.
Well, Must Ministries is a human service organization that's been around for 51 years. And what we do is we help people in poverty. Our mission statement is to serve our neighbors in need. And we basically do 5 things. When I'm drawing up a picture for someone to imagine, I always talk about that people walk on a high wire every day. All of us are on a high wire. It can be a health issue that knocks us off the high wire. For some people that are in poverty, it can be something as small as a flat tire suddenly throws their world into disarray. And Must Ministries is the safety net underneath that high wire to be able to catch people. And we do it in 5 ways. We feed people. We just finished a summer lunch feeding program where we fed we did 535,000 summer lunches for children across the summer months to be able to take care of them while they were out of school. We have a kitchen called Loaves and Fishes, and you can imagine why it's named that. We feed about 80,000 people a year through that particular ministry. And then we put food pantries inside of schools. We embed them inside the schools, and the school social workers are the ones who help choose the families that are able to get food through that particular program. So we have about 600 families a month that we take care of there, 33 physical locations taking care of over 100 schools. And then we have 3 standalone pantries in the community to help take care of people. So we're a feeding organization. We're a sheltering organization. We have a homeless shelter, a brand new one that we just opened with 136 beds and then 36 respite beds. We use those for inclement weather. We also use them when we have a large family. And right now, the fastest growing segment of poverty in the country and homelessness linked together is the suburbs. And you wouldn't necessarily think that. But the reason is because so many of those people now are women and children. And so about 80% of the people that we serve at Must Ministries are women and children. And so we have a homeless shelter and permanent supportive housing. So any night when I'm placing my head on the pillow, I know that underneath the umbrella of Must, there's about 1,500 other people that are placing their head on a pillow at night. And then we do clothing. We do that through a thrift store, and our people come in and shop with a credit card. We do a toy store at Christmas, and over 6,000 children got gifts through the toy store this past year. We have a medical clinic that helps to take care of people's needs. And then we have workforce development. And there we helped over 400 people get jobs this past year, which represented about $12.9 million back into the economy. So those are the kinds of things that we do at Must Ministries. And it's been around for 51 years. The local churches support it like crazy here in our community. And during the pandemic, we served over 225,000 people. And the only thing that exceeded the size of that need was the level of generosity. And in 2019, before the pandemic, we had 17,000 people volunteer at Must that year. And we run it on 11 cents of every dollar. So we're a Charity Navigator 4-star, the only rate to a 4-star. And last year, our percentage rating was we were 98.7%. So it tells you that it's being run the right way. If you're ever going to give to a charity, go to Charity Navigator and check them out. They're a third-party rating system. And you can see where your money is really going.
That's fantastic.
That's great.
One of the questions I have is, how are you able to pastor a church full time and all the work you're doing with this? Because this is two full-time people to run this.
Well, Dr. Jerry Falwell would have told me I was a slacker if I didn't have a third job on top of that. I guarantee you.
Right.
You know, the key is always the people you surround yourself with, because, you know, I don't care how passionate you are about your job, how gifted you might be. At some point, your energy level is going to max out. And when you max out, the people that you have the closest to you are going to determine your level of success in what you're trying to accomplish. So it's always about getting the right people on the team, getting the right people in the right seats on the bus. And I'm very blessed to have two teams that work extraordinarily well. Our offices are only 4 miles apart. So being able to travel from one location to the other is very easy for me. And that really makes a big difference. Plus, the church that I pastor, Piedmont Church, is a very large supporter of Must Ministries. Although we're not connected in any way, they are a very big supporter of what we do here at Must.
All right, let's move back a little even further, because we're making our way back to the part of your testimony that is just unbelievable. But what you're doing, Ike, is just so cool, and it's just reaching so many people. But before that, you had started another church called North Star Church, which I was able to be a part of. And
yes, you were
the chief people officer for Home Bank Mortgage in Atlanta. Tell us what was it like to be? I mean, their companies don't typically have a position called the chief people officer, which was really visionary of the Pat Flood and the people that ran Home Bank. Tell us how you were in the middle of the business force, the business world, and actually able to pastor people in a corporation.
Yeah. Well, they were a faith-friendly organization. And one night I was on TBN doing a broadcast, and normally I was the guy doing the interview. And that particular day, there have been terrible thunderstorms in Atlanta. They couldn't get in a lot of the people that were going to be the guests. And they called me and asked me to be a guest. And so that night I was being interviewed. And I was talking, Charles, about beginning North Star Church. And I talked about servant leadership, and servant evangelism. But the person who heard me speaking thought I was just talking about servant leadership. So they invited me to Home Bank to come in and to talk about being a servant leader. And of course, I was certainly able to do that. And the CEO was there that day. He was very young, early 30s. And he caught me after the speech and he said, "Hey, I'd like to spend some time and talk with you." And he invited me into a process. They had just run a national ad in the USA Today newspaper looking for a chief people officer. And basically, this was the person that was going to run HR for them, but they wanted to run it in a positive way. Many times the HR department, just like a Toby on The Office, they're the people telling you what's wrong. They're the people telling you, here's your dress code. I need those TPS reports in triplicate. I need all of these different things, right? And Pat Flood wanted to have a very positive atmosphere. And so he wanted this chief people officer. And he had a group of about 5 people that he asked to help him find this person. I was one of those people he asked. Andy Stanley was one of the people that he asked. Senator Johnny Isakson here in Georgia was one of those people. And at the end of the day, they came back to me and said, "We really think that you have the skill set." So my question to Pat was, if I'm successful in this company, what will happen? And he said, "We will be good enough to be in Fortune magazine's list of the 100 best places to work in America." My first year there, we weren't large enough. You had to have 1,000 employees, but we went ahead and did everything as if we could apply. And we scored extremely high. And over the next 4 years, until the company was sold on Wall Street, we were one of the 100 best places to work in America. And I loved it. I brought in a group from Raleigh, North Carolina called Corporate Chaplains of America. And over the 5 years they were with us, we had over 1,200 people make professions of faith in the workplace. People like PBS and others came out and did stories on us. NPR did a 5-piece series and said at the end of it, if you're going to do faith in the workplace, these are the guys that are doing it right. So it was quite a compliment to what we wanted to accomplish there. And the company, was amazing with the level of people that we were able to source. We just treated it like a great big church that was really excited about helping to make people's lives better in the marketplace.
So moving, because you were a pastor for several years, and then you moved into corporate world. What are distinctives that you picked up on? What were aspects of ministry that made a difference in corporate world? And then going out and now you're back at Piedmont. What have you brought from corporate world back into your church?
Well, I don't get to bring the private jet, and I don't get to bring those great meals that were on the private jet, and I can still have honey baked ham in the fellowship hall. It was definitely different, the amount of money that you had to be able to create and to be able to build something that was really amazing. And I learned a lot of things. I learned how to be a better leader when it comes to finances, about how to be able to come in, and truly make an organization solid financially. And so many times churches struggle in that area. And we've watched, miraculous things take place here in the life of what we do at Musk, for instance, with all the COVID money, with all of those kinds of things. Our budget this past year was about $33 million. And that was a huge jump from when I first came 11 years ago, and our budget was about $6 million. And so we've watched a lot of growth. We've been able to help a lot of people. I picked up good business practices. I picked up a lot of leadership wisdom from the time that I spent in the corporate world, and I continue to speak there. That's the beauty of what I've done. I've been able to lead a church. I've been able to lead a nonprofit now in this organization, and I've been a part of a great corporate team that took a company from being private to going to Wall Street and having a $300 million cap the day that we became a publicly traded company. So it's been quite a journey to get to be in all of those places.
Well, speaking of journey, it's been quite a journey. Your whole life really is an amazing testimony. Let's go back several years before that, because all the wisdom that you have to share with leaders and all this experience that you have with churches and with corporations and now with Musk Ministries and Piedmont and all of the wonderful ways in which you develop relationships with people all over the world, literally, it kind of goes back to some lessons you had to learn, and many of them the hard way early in your life. When you were pastoring New Hope Church as a young man, married, and then tragedy struck, and you had, like all of us, had to learn a lot of really big time lessons through all of that. Let's go back. You're a young man. I don't know how old you were at this time, but you can share with us. And let's just go to what led to this book, Treasures in the Dark, and what led to all these things you've been doing now for the last 30, 40 years, really, that have been such a tremendous leader. But let's go back to the beginning. Tell us what happened.
Well, I became the pastor of New Hope Baptist Church. I served with a terrific pastor there as his youth minister, Richard Lee, and had a great time being a student pastor. And Richard left to go into evangelism. And they asked me to step up and become the pastor. And we were a church, a large country church, running 250, 300 people. And Richard stepped out to go do evangelism. And I stepped into that particular role. And I was set up for success with the way that Richard had positioned the church, in all honesty. And we were really blessed. All of a sudden, the church really began to grow. There were great things that were happening over a 5-year growth study there at the North American Mission Board, Brandon. We found ourselves being the second fastest growing church in America. God made sure I wasn't number one, because it's not as easy to brag and go, we're number two. So that just doesn't go across as well. But there's one thing, Brandon, since you work for the North American Mission Board, right?
Yes,
I found out Baptists measure everything, because we were the number one church in one key area. We were the largest church in the Southern Baptist Convention in a septic tank. I'm telling you, Baptists measure everything. And that's what was considered a rural church. Were you still on a septic tank? And we were. And so, that little country church just took off. Man, the area was growing so fast. When I came to Fayette County, there was 17,000 people. When I left, there was 120,000 people. If you really want to grow a church, go to a community that's growing. That sure, flattens the curve out for sure. So blessed. My wife was the person who had influenced me to Christ. Her name was Cindy. The only thing that happened had not happened for us was being able to get pregnant. And then just miraculously, out of the blue, we were married nearly 11 years, and we found out that we were going to have our first child. And we were just elated, because we couldn't afford to go to fertility doctors and all this other stuff. I was the pastor of a country church. And so just miraculously, she gets pregnant. Those 9 months fly by. I mean, we're so thrilled. We just keep giving God the glory and praise that we're finally able to get pregnant. And so on March the 1st, 1983, she's at Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta. And it's around 4:00 in the afternoon. And the anesthesiologist has come in and given her an epidural. And when he leaves the room, she looks at me and goes, boy, for the first time today, I feel better. And I said, well, let's pray and thank God for that. And we did. And when we finished praying, I kissed her 7 times and kissed her on the lips. And she said, go out in the waiting room, tell everybody I'm doing great. And so I said, are you sure? Because I've been back there all day long from early that morning when they first let me in. And she said, yeah, I'm doing great. So I go out in the waiting room and I'm talking to all of our family and telling them everything's great. The nurse had told us we ought to have a baby in about 2 hours after the anesthesiologist left. And so, man, I'm as jacked up and as excited as I can possibly be. And I start going back to the labor and delivery area. And I was going down this long hall that would lead into the labor and delivery double doors. And right as I'd passed through one set of double doors, headed to the next set of double doors, I heard this disembodied voice on a speaker say these words, Ward 100 to labor and delivery. And I don't know that I could ever tell you the feeling that just washed over me. But in that moment, just hearing that voice, I knew that my wife was dying. And I started running for that second set of doors. I mean, just this panicked, all of a sudden my shirt is just soaked. I'm running toward her room and I see this nurse standing in her doorway and I see the panic look on the nurse's face and she's shouting at this nurse's station saying, my God, hurry up and get somebody here. I don't know what's wrong. And I ran by her into the room and Cindy was in the middle of cardiac arrest. What we didn't know, but we would learn later, is that she had suffered something called an amniotic embolism. And in this case, it's fatal most of the time. And in Cindy's case, it was catastrophic. It had caused catastrophic heart failure. All of a sudden, that room is filling up with crash carts and doctors, and white coats. And people are telling me, sir, you got to leave the room. And I was saying, no, you don't understand. That's my wife. And they were saying, sir, you need to get out of the room. And I just kept backing away till finally I was in this corner. And I kept thinking I was in this horrible dream. I kept thinking in a moment, I'm going to wake up. I'm going to roll over. I'm going to grab Cindy. And I'm going to say, I just had the most horrible dream I've ever had in my life. But my horror was that I wasn't asleep. I was awake and I was watching them try to save my wife's life. And I completely understood later why they wanted me to leave the room. They were doing everything possible. They were shocking her with the paddles. They were doing everything from just open heart hitting in her chest. And finally, there was this one doctor, and he was literally straddling her on that bed. And I said, "Sir, would you stop beating on her? She's not there anymore." And he looked at me and he said, "Yes, sir, I will." And that day, I lost my wife and I lost my child at Piedmont Hospital in Atlanta. And the darkest valley I could ever imagine walking through. Our first child, we've waited for nearly 11 years to get pregnant. And now it's finally there. It's going to be the most exciting day of your life. And now I'm standing there in the hallway and I'm thinking, I've got to go tell her family. I've got to go tell my family. And they offered, they said, "Do you want us to go?" They said, everyone in the waiting room knows something's happened to someone, but they don't know who it's happened to. And I said, "No, can you let me catch my breath? Because I've got to be the one to go and tell them." And so I'm standing there and they're talking to me and my ears are just ringing. And this nurse comes out and she kind of gently grabs my hand and she put into my hand my wife's jewelry that she had with her. And I bought her the snowflake necklace on our 10th anniversary. And it was beautiful. It was all diamonds. And I had it made for her because, we were struggling with infertility. And anyone that's ever gone through that knows what that struggle is like. And I'd had that necklace made and I'd told her, I said, "Well, you're just like a snowflake. You're one of a kind. If we get to have children, then we'll get to have children. Maybe we'll adopt, who knows what God has in store for us." And that necklace wasn't there. And I asked the nurse, I said, "Can I go back in the room?" I said, she never took this necklace off, even though she wasn't supposed to wear jewelry that day. She had it on. And she said, "Yes, sir." And I went back in and finally I got on my hands and knees, literally. And I crawled and I found it in the corner and then just jerked the necklace off of her, trying to save her life. And when I picked up the necklace part, the chain just kind of, dropped to the floor. And when I picked it up, Charles, the first thing that I noticed, because it always sparkled like crazy, was that literally it wasn't sparkling. And I just took it and I slipped it into my coat pocket. And I went back out and I said, "Okay, I'm ready to go out." And when I walked through those doors, I'll never forget, Cindy's mother looked at me and she just started saying, "Oh, God, no, not my baby. Oh, God, no, not my baby." And I had to look at her and say, "We don't know what happened, but something catastrophic took place. And we've lost her and we've lost the baby." If we had known that it was an amniotic embolism, the doctors could have saved the baby. We just didn't know. And I can remember this one doctor evidently asking the people in the room, "Is any of her family here?" And they pointed me out. And I can remember how he turned and he pointed at me and he just said this to me. He said, "Do we save your wife or do we save the baby?" I never thought I'd ever. All I thought, Charles, is that we were going to have this baby that God had miraculously provided after 11 years of infertility. And we were going to go home and we were going to have a child. And now I'm standing there in a room with devastated people because there is nothing more unnatural on the face of the earth than a parent to lose a child. And I'm looking at her parents knowing they've lost a child. They've lost a grandchild. I've lost a wife. And I didn't know if I would ever smile again. I didn't know if I'd ever be able to just breathe normal again. And it was the longest ride home in my life. A mutual friend of ours who's a musician, Al Holly, drove me home that night. And I can remember being near the airport in Atlanta and the sun was going down. And I just kept thinking, "Oh, God, don't let it get dark. Just don't let it get dark. I don't want to walk in that house in the dark." And Cindy and I had never had a home for years. Again, I was a youth minister and I was making, $125 a week. We never had our own home. And then we lived in a pastorium, and we had just built our house. This happened on March the 1st, and we had moved into our house a few days before Christmas. So she only got to live there for about 4 months. The only room completed in the house was the nursery. And when Al and I walked into that house, it was just the two of us. I said, Al, I want you to get some ladies from the church, and I want you to have them come over and take everything that's in that nursery out. And I want you to find some organizations, some, unwed mothers' homes, other places, because I don't think I'm ever going to be able to walk into that room again. And so I started walking in a very dark place of losing a wife and child. So that's the experience that I had on March 1st, 1983.
All right. Good grief. Let's do this. Let's take a break.
Yeah.
And when we come back, Ike, I want you to tell us just the journey that you went through in order and what brought the smile back to your face, the joy back to your heart after such an incredibly difficult and tragic situation. We'll be right back.
All right, welcome back to the Charles Billingsley podcast. We're talking with Ike Reighard, who is telling us about leadership and life and lessons from them. And one of the things, so Ike, I've worked with Charles for 20 years. So
Right.
You're like the uncle of my brother, which is a weird thing to say.
His uncle.
Yeah, I mean,
The crazy uncle. I
Yeah,
know what you're
yeah.
saying, Adam.
so I've learned Ike lessons through Charles.
Mhm.
One of the ones, and I'm not going to get it exactly right. So you two weigh in. You may remember the moments, but one of the ones I learned from him talking about your story is you guys were having a conversation one day, and you told him something to the effect of, "Don't save all your money and end up missing moments because you never know when they're going to go away."
Yeah. Well, what
Moments.
happened is I was tighter than a drum when I knew I would get mad at my wife for buying plastic straws at the grocery store. They were 33 cents or whatever, because I was just like, we got to save everything. And one time, and Ike's got a really great balance between generosity and investments and saving your money, because it's good to save, but it's also a lesson that I think I could tell us more about. After losing your wife and child, and you were telling me, I can tell me if I'm wrong, but you were real frugal and real, saving every penny you made. But when you lost him, you realized, wow, there's some stuff I probably could have done for them or given her that, maybe I should have splurged a little bit more on my.
Exactly. Because you're sitting there and you're always thinking there's going to be this long runway of a marriage and that you're going to be growing old together. And it doesn't always happen that way. And so it fundamentally changed me. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the DISC profile, the DISC. And I'm a trainer in that particular model. And normally your DISC does not change unless there is a significant traumatic event in your life. And literally my DISC profile changed. I went from a high D driving individual to much more of an I who knows how to enjoy life and experience life. And I started creating memories. And I remember making myself a promise. God, if you give me a family, I'm going to make memories with them, because I can't tell you how many times, Charles, I lived in the pastorium, right? And my office faced the pastorium. How many nights I watched the light go out in my bedroom while I was still in my office, meeting with church people, visitors to the church. And I've watched that light go out. And then all of a sudden, you're walking into this house and it's empty and you're there by yourself. and you're realizing all the money that you saved, all the things you were going to do have now gone by the board. So it's best to do those things now when you can really enjoy them, because we're not promised tomorrow.
I've got a quick question, because, of course, before the break, you told the story, and I'm still thinking of that. And how long was it? You said you did not know when you were going to smile again. And for those people who may be listening and thinking they don't know when they're going to smile again, how long was it, and what helped you with that?
Well, you have more of a broken smile as you go forward. You never get past the thought that life is tissue paper thin. And it really is. One phone call can change your whole life. One knock on your door can change your life. One doctor looking at you and calling and saying, you need to come back in and talk with us. We found something we're concerned about. Life is tissue paper thin. And when you realize that, it gives you a different perspective on life. So you do learn to smile again. And, if we had the time, I could go into the story about how later I met a young lady named Robin. And Robin had been 3 months away from her wedding ceremony. Her fiance was a football player at the University of Georgia, and he was killed in an accident. And that was about a year before my wife's death. And then we met each other, and we were both broken world people. And, we both had gone through trouble in our faith. I tell people all the time who are going through a struggle, a troubled faith is better than no faith at all. There's going to be things that trouble your faith. There's going to be things that rack you right down to your soul, and you're going to go through those times. Charles, you went through it with COVID. When all of a sudden you realized your mortality and you realized the level of just how sick you really were going through those days. And it will fundamentally change you. But a troubled faith is better than no faith at all. And realizing that, and this is the key to me, and it's something I've been preaching now for years. And I can remember the very day that it happened to me. I was standing in downtown Atlanta. I've lost the wife and the child. I'd gone to a hospital to see another couple who had had a child. And I remember walking out of that building thinking, God, how in the world am I going to handle this? And as clear as a bell, God spoke into my heart. I was standing in a place called Woodruff Park. And the thought was this: live your story right now the way you want to be able to tell it later without having to change a thing. Live your story right now, in the moment, the way you want to tell the story later without having to embellish it, without having to change a thing. And when you get in that mindset, that's what helps you to walk through, that deep, dark valley, like David talks about in the 23rd Psalm. Why does the 23rd Psalm resonate so much? Because God is our shepherd. And if you've ever noticed in the 23rd Psalm, in the first 3 verses, he's talking about God. In the 4th verse, it changes. And he begins to talk to God. The pronouns switch right there. Mm-hmm. And he starts talking to God. I can tell you, it's in the deepest, darkest valleys that you start talking to God and you realize his amazing power to be able to bring you through. And that's why later, 5 years after Cindy and my baby's death, I wrote a book for Thomas Nelson called Treasures from the Dark. And that comes from Isaiah chapter 45, verse 3. And it says, I will show you treasures in darkness, and I will show you riches in secret places, so that you will know it is I, the Lord God, who calls you by name. And so God did that for me. And then, Charles, to tie it together from my perspective, you remember the necklace I was talking about? I took that diamond snowflake necklace to a jeweler named Doug Wasson. And Charles, you'll remember a little town called Riverdale, not far from Fayetteville. And I took it to Doug and I said, Doug, I want this made into a ring. I want to be able to wear it as a ring. And so when I gave it to him, I said, Doug, I can't get this thing to sparkle. And he goes, well, leave it with me. He's a master jeweler. And so he calls me one day and he says, hey, I've got your ring made. Come up here. And he met me outside. And man, that ring was sparkling like crazy. And I said, Doug, how'd you get this thing to sparkle again? And he said the most curious thing. He said, do you really have to know? And I said, well, yeah. I mean, why wasn't it sparkling? He said, Ike, a diamond doesn't get its sparkle from on top. A diamond gets a sparkle from underneath. And he said, Cindy's blood was all in the back of those stones when I cleaned it. And he said, that's what stopped the sparkle. I put that ring on and I was driving home, and I can remember the exact spot. I pulled over and I just said, God, I think you've chosen the wrong guy for this journey. And only those who really heard from God would understand what I say. It's louder than an audible voice. He just said, isn't it remarkable? The thing that made the ring lose its sparkle was Cindy's blood. But the only thing that can put the sparkle into someone's life is the blood of Jesus. You trust me and you go preach. And that's what I did. And then God brought Robin into my life. And we were blessed with a daughter named Abigail. And Abigail means her father's joy. And then we adopted a little 7-year-old girl whose mother was killed in an automobile accident. And a wonderful lawyer in my church came to me and said, I hear you're going to adopt this little girl. And I go, yeah. And he goes, well, I'm going to do the adoption for you, meaning pro bono. And I said, no, I want you to do the adoption. He was my lawyer. And I said, but I'm going to pay you. And he said, no, you're not. I said, yeah, I am. And he goes, don't cheat me out of a blessing. Now, guys, listen real careful. I adopted that little girl, and she grew up and married that lawyer's son. And now that lawyer and I share a granddaughter. You tell me there's not a God who orchestrates our life. You tell me that in the middle of the deepest, darkest valley, that God is not saying, hey, I know you by name. I've got you inscribed on the palm of my hand. I've got you, and I'm going to see you through it. Listen, God's not a feeling. God's a fact. And that's what you got to count on. When your feelings and your emotions are out of control, just know that God is there to see you through.
Good grief. Whew. Man, I thank you so much. I want to have you back on, like in the spring, and let's talk about leadership.
Yes.
If you want to join us again.
Yeah, well, it took you long enough to invite me the first time. So,
we exhausted all.
I'll be planning on that in the spring. And what, guys, 26? Is that when he's got me on the schedule?
No.
I love Charles, and I love that shade. Man, I can remember sitting there watching those boys come into the world, buddy.
Yeah, I know. You were there at the birth of both of my kids. You were there. And you know what? I don't even know if this is common anymore, but you are the godfather of both of my children. And you know what? God did bring your smile back, because you're not just fun to be around. You're a jokester. Adam asked about the elevator.
We'll have to tell that later.
I'm going to have to. Well, we got another podcast that we got to record, but real quick. So
Oh, good. When we do, I have to tell the Charles story when we do about the early morning flight when you went and got the Cinnabon. One of my favorite stories ever about Charles.
Let's just save that one for another day.
This is good. This is good promo material.
I just will tell the elevator story. We're going up to the 11th floor of our accountant's building. And I don't know why I'm with Ike. He wanted me to go with him to meet with the accountants for our church. So we're going up the elevator.
This is at North Star.
Yeah, we're at North Star. This is a big deal. We're starting this church. So we're all in downtown Atlanta, decked out in coats and ties. We get in the elevator, and Ike attacks me in the elevator, rips my shirt out, grabs my tie, messes up my hair and everything, pulls my jacket off. And then the elevator door opens, and he straightens his tie, walks out. And there, meanwhile, I'm like, what on earth? So I just realized that right then that this guy.
And you can't say, like, you're walking into the office. You can't do it. What were you doing?
So I'm just like,
I refer to those as lovely moments in our life. And for Charles to come staggering out of that elevator, and the elevator opened directly in the law office, the accountant's office. So it wasn't like you were in a hallway.
That's even better.
Ike, we love you, buddy. We're going to have you on.
I love you guys.
We're going to talk about leadership next time, but thanks for your story.
Thank you so much.
You do, buddy. God bless.
Okay, guys. Have a great day. Bye.
Yeah.